Later in the show. Plus, of course, your first look at the newspaper front pages hot off the press the moment they're delivered. And I'll crown the next greatest Britain and Union jackass before the night is out. So do stay out with us this next 2 hours. This is Dan Wootton Tonight. Let's go. Just one thing first, though. Pressure is mounting on Sir Keir Starmer. Sorry, I actually mean Sir Keir Starmer. Over his beers with Keir, which clearly broke lockdown laws, right? We can agree on that now. Remember, this is the man who wants the Prime Minister to resign after being presented with a birthday cake. Well, today, the Labour leader sounded more than a little uncomfortable when asked about the status of the investigation on the Today programme.
Have there been any contact with you or the office in recent weeks?
The police looked at this months ago and it came to a clear conclusion that no rules were broken, and that's because no rules were broken.
Not quite.
All the rest
I just
of it.
wondered if they've been back in touch since the local MP's been raising questions about it.
Well, look, they've already concluded their investigation. No rules were broken, and this is simply being whipped up as mudslinging by the Tories.
But you must remember if the police had rung up your office.
If the Conservative Party put as much effort into answering the question, how are you going to help people with their energy bills, as they're putting into this mudslinging, they'd actually do a service for millions of people who are really worried about their energy bills.
But by not answering questions like mine, aren't you adding to the clouds of doubt around this?
Well, that's just... We were working, we stopped for food, no party, no rules were broken. I don't know what I could add to that.
He's floundering, folks. Now, Labour later said he hadn't been spoken to by cops, but it feels like only a matter of time. We'll have more on this story later in the show with my superstar panel. Let's take a look at them. Former editor, current columnist at the Daily Star, Dawn Neeson, the Conservative commentator, Calvin Robinson, and the broadcaster, Narinder Kaur. But first, the news at 9 with Polly Middlehurst.
Thanks, Dan. The top stories on GBNews this evening. The Prime Minister has told Ukrainian MPs that their country must and will win the war. Boris Johnson is the first world leader to address their parliament since the invasion began, and he announced a £300 million military aid package for the country. President Zelensky said Ukraine and the UK are now brothers and sisters. The Prime Minister said it's Ukraine's finest hour, and they've broken what he calls the irresistible force of Putin.
Your children and your grandchildren will say that Ukrainians taught the world that the brute force of an aggressor counts for nothing against the moral force of a people determined to be free. They will say that Ukrainians proved by their tenacity and sacrifice that guns and tanks cannot suppress a nation fighting for its independence. And that is why I believe and I know that Ukraine will win.
Well, multiple airstrikes have hit Ukraine's western city of Lviv, damaging power stations and leaving much of the city without electricity. Meanwhile, in the southwestern city of Odessa, Russian missiles struck a military airfield, destroying drones and ammunition supplied by the US and Europe. And in the besieged port city of Mariupol in Ukraine, the International Red Cross has evacuated more than 100 civilians from the Azovstal steel plant. The city's mayor, though, says more than 200 people are still trapped. Here, energy firms have been given a deadline to explain why they're increasing customer direct debit payments amid accusations that it's beyond what's necessary. The Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, confirmed the energy regulator, Ofgem, has issued compliance reviews. Suppliers have 3 weeks to respond. He warned firms that if set payments aren't fair and reasonable, action will be swift, including substantial fines. And as you've been hearing, the US Supreme Court says it's launched an investigation after confirming the authenticity of a leaked draft seeking to overturn abortion laws in America. Chief Justice John Roberts says he's ordered court marshals to investigate the leak, adding the draft wasn't in its final form. The document suggests the Supreme Court will vote to overturn the Roe v. Wade decision that legalised abortion nationwide in America. President Joe Biden says his office will be ready to protect abortion rights if a ruling is issued. And the World Health Organization is warning obesity has reached epidemic proportions in Europe, causing around 1.2 million deaths every year. Its new report finds nearly 60% of adults and 8% of children under the age of 5 are all overweight. They're citing the COVID pandemic as making things worse with the drop in exercise rates and people eating more fat, salt and sugar. On TV, online and on your radio via DAB+, you're with GB News. And now it's Dan Wootton Tonight.
I know my experience isn't unique. In fact, it's disturbingly become the norm. So I called up my NHS GP to book a non-urgent appointment on something I needed checking out that was probably fine, but, could have been serious if it wasn't fine. My word, you would have thought the surgery had just been sent a challenge on how not to see me. So it turned out the soonest I could get a telephone consultation was 9 days' time in a 3-hour block that I had to keep free. When they finally did call me and I explained the health issue, there was still no offer of a face-to-face appointment. Quite the opposite, actually. It felt like they were doing everything possible to keep me out. So I actually consulted the internet and decided my situation was urgent enough to book a private GP appointment the same day. I appreciate I'm privileged enough to do so and actually believe folk like me should be actively encouraged to do what we can to protect the NHS for those who have no other alternative. But let's just get real about this. Britain is in the midst of a GP crisis. 1 in 3 surgeries has closed to non-urgent bookings in the past year because they are so busy. That's according to the GP magazine Pulse. Meanwhile, 292 surgeries out of 824, that's 35%, had to ration appointments recently. That pushes patients to walk-in centres, to pharmacies and to A&E. Meanwhile, a Daily Mail investigation today, there it is, found GPs are being forced to care for 2,200 patients each because of NHS staff shortages. When you dig into the statistics, it's not hard to see why. So an extra 3.1 million patients have been registered since June 2017, yet the number of fully qualified family doctors has actually fallen by 1,343 over the same period. The government's pledge to hire an extra 6,000 family doctors by 2024, well, it's looking increasingly shaky to me. But this is what a Department of Health and Social Care spokesman said on this today. We are working with the NHS to improve access to GPs, tackle the COVID backlog and grow the general practice workforce to ensure everyone receives the care they need, including making £520 million available to improve access and expand general practice capacity during the pandemic. We've invested £1.5 billion until 2025 to create an extra 50 million appointments a year. But I think it's about time we stop pretending the NHS is providing us a world-class health service. I understand it's heresy to suggest such a thing, but it's true. And we must, as a country, have difficult conversations and acknowledge that just throwing money consistently into a bottomless NHS black hole simply ain't working. I would argue, hear me out here, don't panic. I would argue that GP services should not be free at the point of use for folk like me. Because there has to be a way to get out of this crisis and allow the most vulnerable in society, the elderly, the poor, kids, to see a doctor face-to-face whenever they need to. To respond now, let me turn to my superstar panel. Former editor of the Daily Star, their current Star columnist Dawn Neeson, the Conservative commentator Calvin Robinson and the broadcaster Narinder Kaur. Dawn, look, I know everyone has a story like mine. That's what's so shocking. I'm not unique. It's virtually impossible to see an NHS GP these days.
It is. I mean, only 61% of consultations are in person now, and before the pandemic, that was 81%.
Yeah. And remember, the other 61% of people who actually get through that telephone triage-type system.
Dan,
loads of people are just saying, I can't be bothered.
Dan, we've all got stories like this. I know 3 people personally that have been recently diagnosed with cancer, unfortunately, including one very close to me, and it's only because 2 of them were lucky enough to be able to pay to get an initial checkup. Now,
which is what I did.
They would still be waiting, and as we all know, with cancer, the longer you wait, the longer you leave it, the worse the circumstances.
Well, even 6 weeks can be critical, Dawn.
Dan, tell me about it. But I'm very confused by this story because, on one hand, we have GPs saying they are overworked, they want to cut their working hours, they can't cope. But on the other hand, we have nearly 6 in 10 GPs working a 3-day week, and on an average earning £100,000. Now, so I'm confused. What is actually happening with our GP service? Why are surgeries not open? My local surgery, like many others, is blaming COVID still. That is not an excuse anymore. No. That is not an excuse. Dan, it is harder to get into than Fort Knox, and I've used that expression a lot, but it really is.
Yeah.
Literally got hazard tape over the doors. Why? They're meant to be seeing sick people. They just want to see the healthy people. So I'm very confused about what's going on. We know there's pressure. We know we need more GPs. But at the moment, GPs themselves don't seem to be making it that easy for patients to see them.
Calvin, it's the opposite. And actually, I really worry about elderly people who struggle with phones. I have heard horrific stories. I get sent your stories all the time and do keep emailing them. I do read them all, of elderly folks saying they've had a GP tell them to take a photo on their iPhone of a lump growing on their body. They don't know how to send the photo to the doctor's surgery. It's morally corrupt, Calvin.
It is. And even when they do know how to send it, they've been misdiagnosed. I'm receiving so many DMs.
Diagnosed by an
people,
iPhone
exactly.
photo.
No.
People are looking at blurry potato camera photographs, misdiagnosing patients, and then further down the line, they're regretting it because the time has been, the time's gone. GPs disappeared throughout lockdown, throughout the pandemic. They went undercover, but they soon came back, didn't they, when they could charge £10 or £15 per injection to the government.
Well, that's another issue, isn't it? The fact that just when this backlog started, the booster programme meant that GPs could say again, don't worry about non-urgent care because we're all about the vaccine.
And they were making thousands of pounds per day. They were banging out these vaccines, but they wouldn't see normal people about normal problems. Even if someone thought that they had something seriously wrong with them, if they weren't vaccinated, they didn't want to see them. And it's come to the point now where they want to stick to virtual or telephone. They don't want in person anymore.
It's a bit like Squid Games. I think it's a bit like Squid Games, trying to get an appointment with...
Because you've had a personal experience with this, haven't you? What happened with you?
So I had a ruptured cyst. I didn't know at the time. Was in agony. Called the doctors. I couldn't get to see them on the phone. And they just said, take a paracetamol, take a Nurofen, which I did. Ended up in A&E, which is almost like torture. It's almost like they're sending you there as punishment. Sat there for 10, 11 hours. Oh, gosh. They were short-staffed, got sent home, said it was nothing. And it wasn't nothing. It was a ruptured cyst. Can be very dangerous for a woman of my age. And this went on for 2 months. I still couldn't see a GP for 2 months.
Ridiculous.
After 2 months of the agony, finally got to speak to a GP on the phone, and they referred me to get an ultrasound scan. And that took another 8 weeks. And I'm still here, and that problem is there.
But this is hideously unfair on A&E, paramedics, many of whom are not anywhere near as much as GPs are earning. No. The pressure A&E staff are under is awful.
Well, I was there for 10 or 11 hours.
Indeed. And look, the whole point is, I do understand that there are certain things that GPs can do on the phone or can do on the internet, right? Like referrals, which so often are required by insurance companies, for example, if you need to get your ankle checked out or something. But I think we need to fundamentally evaluate the situation.
Well, there should be a choice, shouldn't there? Because, like you said, some elderly people don't know how to use technology or don't want to use technology.
I don't like to use technology.
I
don't like to use technology. They say, do you want to send a picture? No.
I want
to
it's not just elderly people. Absolutely.
I don't want to do this on the phone. I need to see you.
And
my children are poorly. My child, you need to see them. I have to demand it.
Exactly. If you've got a newborn baby, exactly.
You almost have to force the whole situation.
You're forcing people to A&Es. What do you all think about my suggestion, though? that privileged folk like me should actually be actively
But we pay our taxes for this system.
No, so I agree with you. I've said this all along. If you can afford your healthcare, you should pay for your healthcare. The NHS should be a backup system, a security net, a safety blanket for people
and
who
for when
can't.
you're
What about the
diagnosed
ones
with
we're paying our
cancer.
taxes?
That's what
we're
we pay
paying
it
our
for.
taxes
Yeah, we pay it for people that can't afford healthcare.
Right, but still,
So if we can't
I
afford
want
it,
to be
we
able
should
to
pay
use
for it.
that system. Whatever
Well,
I'm
that's on
paying
you. That's on
into,
your
I would
conscience.
like to use that system.
That's on you.
No, and that's completely fine. I think the issue that I have, Calvin, is that actually we're actively discouraged from seeking private healthcare because that's what the government feels is the only socially palatable thing to say.
The way it works at the moment, it doesn't work, does it? So I think we should start talking about reforming the NHS and or potentially privatising it. People have said for years, the Tories are trying to privatise the NHS and they haven't done anything about it. So maybe it's time they actually did get on with it.
Well, for me, and this has always been my position, I think it's the GPs, which is what we need to change. Actually, if rich people had to pay to see their GP, you would actually cut out a lot of waste in the system because actually where people really need to rely on the NHS is when you get that cancer diagnosis.
Yes, no, it is.
That's when you need the NHS there. If you have to pay 20 quid to see your GP, I understand it's heresy. I understand it goes against the fundamental principle of the NHS. But can I just say, if you knew that meant you were going to get the best cancer treatment, I think a lot of people would start to
I'm very nervous
consider
about
it.
making it means-tested, creating a two-tier system. I get where you're coming from, but it does make, as Narendra says...
What's the solution?
The NHS isn't free.
No,
we already pay
but what is
for it.
the solution?
I don't know. The solution is to...
More doctors. We shouldn't have sent them all back home like ET.
Start spending the billions of pounds
We need more
spent on it
doctors.
in a better way. That's
the money we
answer.
already spend, we could spend on other things, like health insurance, for example. We already pay more per year, per person,
spend it
by the
on
NHS
reorganising.
than we would for private
We could
healthcare.
spend it on stop paying organisers, managers, 250
Absolutely.
grand, and start paying the people
and
actually doing the jobs
diversity-
properly.
Diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, Calvin Robinson, Dawn Newton, Narendra Kerr, my superstar panel, and they are here all night. But also coming up, with almost 550 migrants arriving in Britain in 2 days, is the delay in the government's Rwanda plan fueling the crisis? Well, Nigel Farage, you know he's been out in the Channel, and he'll reveal what he found out very soon. But up next in The Clash, as Nicola Sturgeon becomes the latest politician to swerve what's apparently the most difficult question of our time, should she have committed to just defining what a woman is? My incredible lineup of former Olympic swimmer and defender of women's rights, Sharon Davies, Executive Director of Sex Matters, Maya Forstater, and LGBT rights activist Peter Tatchell will debate this important issue in just a moment. But I want to know what you think on this. Was Sturgeon gutless? Was it a cop-out? I'll tell you what she said, by the way, after the break. But email me your thoughts, dan@gbnews.uk, tweet me at gbnews. Our poll running there too. The results shortly.
Hi there, I'm Aidan McGivern. Warmer, drier and brighter weather is on the way, but for the next 24 hours at least it stays generally cloudy. There'll be outbreaks of rain overnight, followed by heavy showers on Wednesday. This area of high pressure is going to move in for the weekend, but over the next few days, weather fronts will topple around the top of it, and they'll bring some outbreaks of rain or showers during much of Wednesday and Friday in particular. And for Tuesday nights, it stays cloudy, spells of rain crossing Northern Ireland, Scotland, Northern and Central England, as well as North Wales, eventually making their way further south into East Anglia and the southeast. Staying drier for the South Wales and southwest area, but for most, because of the cloud, it's going to be a mild start to Wednesday, 9 to 11 Celsius generally. But it's a grey and damp start to the day, a lot of cloud cover, that cloud covering some hills, some mistiness around coasts as well. And I think it'll take some time to brighten up. In fact, many areas will stay cloudy throughout the day. But where we do see signs of brightness, there'll also be heavy showers developing. Initially towards the west, but increasingly the focus later, with highs of 17 or 18 degrees, will be across central and eastern parts of England, as well as eastern Scotland. A warmer day to come for many, but that warmth leading to some lively downpours, hail and thunder possible in places. They do die away on Wednesday night, and during the early hours of Thursday, for many places it's dry with lengthy clear spells. The exception, northern and western parts of Scotland, parts of Northern Ireland, where it will be cloudier with some outbreaks of rain. But it's a mild start to Thursday once again, with 9 or 10 degrees, a typical temperature at the start of the day, and soon warming up actually. For much of England and Wales, it's dry with long spells of sunshine, perhaps the odd shower towards the west. Scotland and Northern Ireland, although mild, will be generally cloudier with outbreaks of rain, particularly towards the northwest. Friday sees further heavy showers or longer spells of rain, drier at the weekend.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question.
That's two questions, actually. That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News. Darren Grimes and Nigel Farage coming up, but time now for The Clash. It's the question that's tripped up Keir Starmer, Rishi Sunak, Angela Rayner and many more, and now scheming Sturgeon has refused to define what a woman is. Following the disturbing trajectory of spineless politicians who've shirked the topic, the Scottish First Minister shut down a reporter from The Times who broached the issue earlier in this week, lashing out by saying, I'm just not going to get into this debate at a level that's about simplified and lurid headlines. Trans people are amongst possibly the most stigmatised and discriminated against minorities in our society. And every time we oversimplify this debate, trans people actually suffer. And I think it's important that's such a tiny minority that we actually take the issues around protecting and enhancing the rights of trans people seriously. I do not believe that trans rights and women's rights are or should in any way be in conflict, and I will argue that case until my dying breath. And that, I think, is the basis on which we should try to progress this debate. Now, it comes amid controversial reforms planned by the SNP that would allow people in Scotland to change their legal sex just by signing a declaration, no longer needing a medical diagnosis or the approval of a doctor. So, as she becomes the latest politician to swerve the question, should Nicola Sturgeon have committed to defining a woman? I want to hear your views on this down at gbnews.uk, at gbnews, and we've got our Twitter poll running there too. But weighing in on this hot-button issue, former Team G Olympic swimmer Sharon Davies, human rights campaigner Peter Tatchell, and Executive Director of Sex Matters Maya Forstater. Maya, honestly, could you believe it when you read this response from Sturgeon? Because she was simply asked to define what a woman was. No one was asking her about trans rights, which I'm sure we all agree are important.
I wasn't surprised. She's been shutting down this debate for years and years and refusing to listen to women's rights campaigners who say that there's a conflict of rights. So honestly, I wasn't surprised, but I'm still disappointed. Politicians should be able to say what a woman is.
Indeed. Sharon Davies, I presume you agree.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, my area of expertise is sport, and I can tell you categorically that it really matters in sport. And to say that there's no conflict of interest is absolutely not true. If we can't explain, what a biological female is, then how on earth do we protect their right to have fair sport? So, I just think it doesn't help the trans issue. I think it actually makes the trans issue more difficult. There's absolutely nothing wrong with being a transgender woman or a transgender man and being explained as a transgender man or a transgender woman. I think clear language enables all of us to protect our beliefs and be able to talk to each other and understand each other better.
But Peter Tatchell, you thought Sturgeon's answer was the right one. Why?
Not quite. I mean, what I do say is that I think that the fuss about the definition diverts us from the really pressing issue about protecting the dignity, rights, welfare and safeguarding of all women, including trans women. So if I was asked that question, I'd say it's very simple. There are two different kinds of women. There is a woman defined by her biological sex, and there is another different form of woman defined by her gender identity. They are different, they're not the same, but both are equally valid. And I think we need to try and find the common ground instead of what divides us, because all women, including trans women, do suffer from misogyny, hate crime, domestic violence, rape, and so on. And let's all work together, for heaven's sake, to protect all women.
Mike, can you just respond to Peter as to why the definition does matter?
The definition matters because, as Peter said, women and trans women are not the same. When it comes to sports, when it comes to safeguarding, when it comes to getting pregnant, when it comes to anything, there is nothing that I know about being a trans woman because it's impossible for me to be a trans woman. Peter could become a trans woman, but I couldn't. If somebody wants to call themselves a woman in their private life, they should be able to. But when it comes to places where sex matters, whether that's prisons, women's refuges, women's toilets, changing rooms, girls' schools, boys' schools, the definition matters. And the definition is about being male or female, not about gender identity.
And Maya, you have concerns, don't you, about these new Scottish policies which are going to essentially allow for self-ID?
Yes, so the Westminster government has decided not to go ahead with reforming the Gender Recognition Act to allow anyone to change their sex just by making a declaration. But the government in Edinburgh wants to go ahead with this year. And their proposal is to allow a child as young as 16 to change their legal sex. After having thought about it for just 3 months, they will be able to apply, and 3 months later they would be able to have their legal sex changed without ever seeing a doctor, without ever having their mental health assessed, without ever having anyone go through with them why they're feeling this way and whether it really is a long-term decision that they want to make at the age of 16.
Is that right, that Sturgeon policy?
That's what the Scottish Parliament...
No, I completely understand, but I'm Peter, that you think that policy is the right one.
Well, the proposal for self-ID is not simply signing a declaration, it is signing a statutory declaration in front of a justice of the peace or a solicitor or some other qualified professional, which has the legal force of law. And if someone violates what they have declared, in theory at least, they could be prosecuted for fraud. So it's not simply a case you can just walk in and sign a declaration and get away with things scot-free. Moreover, obviously, I understand the concerns that some women have, and I sympathise, but I think that you will find that the vast majority of women who want to go through this process are already living commendable, laudable lives as trans women. They haven't harmed anyone. They're not a threat to anyone. And what this whole argument is underlying is the idea that trans women are somehow a threat, potential predators to other women. Now, it is true that there may be a small number who are a threat, but they are tiny and unrepresentative. And when we make law in this country, we do not base us on what a minority of bad apples may do. We base it on the majority. So, for example, no one in their right mind with any decency would dare suggest that we restrict Muslims because a handful happen to be terrorists. most Muslims are not terrorists and do not support terrorism.
Sharon, I've spoken
therefore,
to you.
By the same token, we should not demonise the whole trans community.
No, but Sharon, I've spoken to you.
Anybody.
No, and I was going to say, Sharon, I've spoken to you about this topic a lot over the years, and I have never heard you demonise anyone trans. Actually, quite the opposite. But what you're trying to do is protect women.
Yeah, absolutely. And protect trans women as well, and trans men. The policies that we have in place at the moment for sport totally and utterly ignore trans men who are biological females who just don't seem to matter because they're no threat to men's sports. And no one is taking any consideration for them whatsoever, the same way they're not really taking any consideration for biological female athletes who, train just as hard as men and are losing their opportunities in sport, as we've been seeing over the last few years, quite considerably. And if it carries on, we will not have any female successes. We will only have men winning the men's races and males winning the female races. So there's got to be a way for us to understand our language so that we can put protections in place. And, whether that means that we set up, crisis centres for women and crisis centres for trans women, I don't understand why that would be such an issue. I would imagine that the attention that you would need as a trans woman may be slightly different than the attention that you would need as a woman, because biologically you are different. So I don't know that there would be any demonising. I just think it enables us to talk honestly and fairly and protect everybody, because personally, from my point of view, I love sport and I want everyone to be involved in sport, but I do want it to be fair.
Yeah, but we don't want to oversee the destruction of female sport. Of course we don't. I just want to come back to Sturgeon. Of course, she's made this comment in the run-up to the local elections, which are on Thursday, and you are the co-founder of this brilliant campaign that I completely support, Respect My Sex If You Want My Ex, where you are saying that you believe voters should simply ask the people running for office, what is a woman? Now, Sturgeon has failed your test.
Absolutely. And she's trying to push through self-ID in Scotland. I mean, it's one thing to ask politicians in England to define sex, but it's a much more urgent question in Scotland. And we need to be asking MSPs and MPs to really think through what the impacts of this proposal will be on women, on girls, on sport, and on single-sex services. And they haven't done that. And she's saying, we shouldn't talk about this in lurid sound bites. No, we shouldn't talk about it in lurid sound bites. We should talk about it seriously. And there are women in Scotland who are crying out for this, and Nicola Sturgeon is ignoring them.
Yeah, and
I understand the concern.
Peter, you come in first, Peter, and then I'll come to you, Sharon. Peter, come in.
I understand the concerns, but trans women have been using women's toilets for decades with virtually no problems ever. No complaints by other women, no incidents. The idea that a man would dress up as a woman and use self-ID as a way of getting into a woman's toilet, I think is a bit fanciful.
Okay, your response to that?
Bad things to women will just go ahead and do them. And I think I've got a friend of mine.
Peter, just let Maya respond to that. Peter, just let Maya respond to that specific point.
And she has had trans women in that women's centre with the agreement of both the staff and the clients for 5 or 6 years.
Peter, just hold up 1 second. Just let Maya respond to that specific point.
I think your opinion about who goes into women's toilets is neither here nor there. It's about women. Many women do not want to undress with male people, whatever their gender identity. That's the honest truth. And while you
understand
might think
that,
it's fine,
Sharon, I want to give you the final word.
I just find it, really frustrating that people don't ask women, that men seem to be making decisions, as they are in America at the moment, about women's bodies and women's rights. And the fact that we get called, I think, bodies rather than women is just so degrading. And it's not right that we're losing our language. It's just not right.
Fascinating debate.
But Sharon, the majority of women in Scotland who've been polled support trans rights.
Yes,
the majority of women
the majority of people that have polled about sport do not support trans women in sport. So we can argue those points, but, I'm going to disagree.
Fascinating debate, certainly not one of lurid sound bites. I'm sure you'll all agree. Thank you so much. That was the former Team GB Olympic swimmer Sharon Davies, the human rights campaigner Peter Tatchell, and the executive director of Sex Matters, Maya Forstater. Fascinating stuff. So who do you agree with? Eden on Twitter says, funny how it's not been a problem for Labour to define a woman this last week concerning Angela Rayner. They can when it suits them. Do you know what? I was thinking that. John on Twitter, I don't really care much one way or another as long as she performs in her political role successfully. And from Debbie, sick of this woke nonsense. A woman is an adult human female. Boris is the only one to admit it. Sturgeon always has to do the opposite of him, so it's no surprise. And your verdict is now in. It's overwhelming. 95% of you agree that Nicola Sturgeon should have committed to defining a woman in that interview before the local elections. Just 5% of you say she made the right call. Well, you know what? You don't have to vote SNP, do you? Coming up, after a new survey predicts Tories will face their biggest local election loss in 26 years, our outsider and formerly Boris Johnson's biggest supporter, Darren Grimes, delivers his 5-point plan to put the PM back in favour. That's in the outsider soon. But first, as another huge surge of migrants land on Britain's shores, is the delay in Priti Patel's Rwanda policy fueling the crisis? Nigel's back from the Channel to tell us what's been going down. He's straight after the break.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News. Darren Grimes and Lionel Shriver coming up, but it's What the Farage time now with the country's most famous Nigel. And as we feared, it was indeed a false dawn. 11 days of no migrant crossings in the English Channel raised hopes that the Rwanda plane may have got off to a storming start. However, as I warned last week, the weather did in fact turn out to be the major force behind the disappearance of dinghies and boats making their way to Britain. Some 293 migrants crossed the Channel and 9 small vessels yesterday, bringing the total for the year now to more than 7,000, treble last year's rate for the same period. Our Nigel Farage, well, let's be honest, he's been 10 steps ahead on this story for many years now, and he was out in the Channel again yesterday, witnessing the chaos for himself. Now, Twitter keyboard warriors accused him of making up stories about migrants mysteriously throwing their mobile phones into the sea. Well, you know, we keep the receipts here at GB News. Twitter trolls, this one's for you.
We have now seen, in the last couple of minutes, 3 of the people on that boat throwing their mobile phones into the water. It was interesting. One of them, I won't say who, we saw on the telephone basically describing who we were, clearly speaking to somebody in England. Of that, I've got no doubt at all. But 3 of them we've seen throwing their phones into the water. If these were legitimate refugees, why would they need to do that?
So, Nigel, I mean, look, I know this is a very serious story, of course it is, but it was sort of infuriating / hilarious yesterday. Everyone saying, oh, you've made that up, Farage, and you had it all on tape.
Yes, I mean, look, number one, what I saw yesterday, and I was back out there because many commentators, including Dan, friends of ours, were saying 11 days, no crossings, Rwanda works. I thought, well, I'll get out there and prove they're wrong. Which was the first purpose of being there. Secondly, we filmed a French escort. That French naval vessel had followed that boat from a quarter of a mile off Cap Finisterre on the French coast. So we filmed that. But I could not believe we were able to actually film throwing of mobile phones, iPhones, into the English Channel. Why would you? If you were a legitimate refugee, you would want Dan to prove who you were. You'd want to prove the terrible things that you'd been through. The reason you throw your mobile phone into the sea is you don't want anyone to know your true identity, so you can make up, frankly, your identity, the suffering you've been through. Oh, I nearly forgot. You can hide your bank account too, can't you? Because, the BBC and Sky, and I watch their news reports, I have to. Something needs to get my blood up. To come to GBNews and do the show. And they keep talking about poor, desperate people. That particular boat yesterday, there was someone on that boat, a woman on that boat I spoke to. She spoke perfect English, albeit in a French accent. I would guess she was a Kurd, I would think. But these were not poor, desperate people. These were people hiding their identity to illegally get into the United Kingdom. It sums up what a complete racket the whole thing is. And here's the big point. Rwanda isn't working at all, and here's why. They've heard it again and again in Dunkirk and Calais. The British government's going to get tough. Push back. Remember that? Push back. Going to turn the boats round and push them back to France. That policy was dropped last week. Every other blood-curdling cry we've heard from Priti Patel and Boris Johnson has resulted in absolutely nothing. No one there believes Rwanda will happen if, and only if, those planes start taking off from Manston and take hundreds of young men to Rwanda. Then it will be a deterrent. But already we have 6 legal claims against the government using the Human Rights Act, and we were told today by a Downing Street spokesman that the original plan, that the deportations would start before the end of May, has now been delayed by several months. And that takes us into June, July, August. The water gets warmer, the sea gets calmer, and I think the Conservative government are going to be overwhelmed by this crisis. This hasn't gone away. Do you know something? There are 1 million people now on the waiting list for social housing, many of them in red wall seats. This will guarantee a Labour, Lib Dem, SNP coalition at the next election. This issue alone will do it, let alone the economy.
Which is why, Nigel, you've got lots of Tory MPs just saying to the government, get on with it, despite these legal challenges. Could they do that?
Well, I mean, the answer is if there's a will, there's a way, and you can do anything. The truth of it is, and I've said this, Dan, from the start, Brexit wasn't completed. Bizarre, isn't it? Even Theresa May was prepared to leave the European Convention on Human Rights. Boris Johnson won't do it. We have the Human Rights Act, which incorporates that legislation into British law. All the while it's there, everything we do is subject to legal challenge. It takes us years to deport terrorists, let alone those who cross the English Channel. We need Brexit 2.0. We need to be freed of European courts. This country, since Magna Carta, has shown the world what freedom, liberty, trial by jury, good values are all about. We don't need some bunch of judges, and they're not even legally trained, most of them. They're jurists, which is a sort of bizarre Napoleonic concept. We don't need these people in Strasbourg telling us how to live our lives. The government needs to act, or it will, I repeat, be overwhelmed by what's about to come. My intelligence is the numbers coming will be huge, vast. The average boat now takes 35 to 40 people. This time last year, it took 15 to 20. It won't be long before boats of 200 are crossing the English Channel.
That is a terrifying prospect from the man whose every prediction on this story has turned out to be true so far. And Nigel Farage, I know you will keep on this, of course, back tomorrow night at 7 p.m. here on GB News. Thank you so much, Nigel. Now, coming up, should Durham Police reopen the Beers with Care investigation? Tory Minister Anne-Marie Trevelyan has been leading the cause, and I think she's dead right. But what about my superstar panel? We'll debate that after 10 in the Media Buzz. But first, as a new poll makes grim reading for the Tory party's chances at the local election, Darren Grimes presents to Boris a 5-point plan to save his premiership. Hope he's watching. Darren, he's tonight's Outsider next.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News. A first look at tomorrow's newspaper front pages very soon, but Darren Grimes is tonight's Outsider. Now, a new poll predicting a devastating Tory loss in Thursday's local elections amid growing concern that Partygate and the worsening cost of living crisis may see voter backlash against the Prime Minister. The poll conducted by Electoral Calculus revealed that the Conservatives could lose as many as 548 seats, compared to Labour gaining nearly 820, in what would be the worst performance for the Tories since Tony Blair led Labour to victory against John Major in the 1996 local elections. Now, the poll is also predicting the Tories could lose the two flagship councils of Westminster and Wandsworth, which would also see the party control fewer than 40 local councils compared to Labour's 85. But even if the results are bad, Darren Grimes doesn't believe it's over for the PM. And he's prepared for us tonight a 5-point action plan on how Boris can save his premiership. So, Darren, let's kick off. What's the first thing Boris needs to do?
So, my first thing, Dan, to this 5-point plan to make Boris Johnson great again, as Trump might say, and give Boris Johnson his mojo back, fearless libertarian throughout his career, right? He was a fearless columnist, and of course he was editor of the brilliant Spectator magazine, having a wide range of views, given a platform before we here at GB News came along. And I actually think he needs to say to his secretaries of state, especially Nadine Dorries, it's got to be said, that we need to get rid of the more zany aspects of the online safety bill. Earlier today, GB News posted an exclusive to its website with Matt Letitia, Dan, who I know you've had on this show, the former footy player, who actually said himself the online safety bill would curtail speech. There are requirements in that bill, Dan, that mean that even Elon Musk, right, libertarian defender of speech on Twitter, that left-wing hellhole, would struggle to defend legal speech within the rules of legal but harmful bans on speech. That just cannot be allowed to take place in the United Kingdom.
OK, so I like it. Point one, go back to becoming a libertarian. What's the second thing Boris needs to do, Darren?
We need a radical budget, Dan, right? We need one like that put forward by Nigel Lawson in the 80s. I think it was after the 1983 election. One that actually takes into consideration how serious the times are. If you looked at the economy until Lawson and Mrs. Thatcher came along, we were an economic basket case. We had inflation sky high. We had debt piling up like you wouldn't believe, and a really uncompetitive economy with struggling productivity. Guess what we have right now? Sky high debt. We've got inflation going up and up and up, and people really, really struggling. I think we need a budget as radical as that, one that cuts taxes, gets serious on energy, we get fracking, and actually starts to put Britain first.
Point three, what does Boris need to do?
So this, I think, in an increasingly unstable and insecure global picture, Boris... And I couldn't even believe this when I read it last night. Boris needs to look seriously at MOD warnings, Ministry of Defence warnings, that we're actually set to miss out on our 2% of GDP NATO spending commitment by 2025. That means we're about to head for a real terms cut in security spending. And I think, Dan, we cannot seriously think, right, as Russia and China start to arm themselves to the teeth, that now is the time to do this. I mean, I know the Russian army has gone from being the second best in the world to the second best army in Ukraine, but still they are a serious threat. And I really don't think now is the time to be going soft on defence commitments.
Good. Point four. What is it? I'm excited.
We need to scrap nanny state nonsense.
Oh,
Dan.
yes, we do.
We so do. He promised this during his leadership pitch. It was red meat for the Tory base. We all said, this sounds fantastic. I want what this man is selling. Unfortunately, we haven't had it. A good example, Dan, and people at home might not be aware of this, mind. We are about to ban, as a country, buy one, get one free, or 3 for 2 deals on food deemed to be too naughty for us, right? During a cost of living
crisis. I mean,
exactly. It is insane, utter insanity. We need all the offers we can get our hands on it.
And also, it's up to us to choose what we want to buy, to choose what we want to eat. Give us the information, sure, but let us make the choice. Couldn't agree more with you.
This goes back to your monologue earlier, Dan, about the NHS, right? We are here for a good life. We are not here to live to protect the NHS. That's the fundamental point, I think, for me. And the last point, Dan?
Yes. What is it? Hit me.
The last point, we need to fix childcare in this country. There will be people, I've no doubt, watching this right now who might be thinking, this is a weight around a family's neck, right? And the British economies. If you cannot go to work, if you cannot get back into the labour market as a woman, as a mother, how on earth can you expect economies to perform to their best? We have some of the highest costs in the OECD, in the developed world. We've got young people today that are saying, I cannot afford to have children. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to hold off or not have them at all. Actually being precluded from having kids. you can't expect an economy to prosper in that environment. But it's far too expensive right now to actually seek childcare because we have a really, really regulated system. A Tory government, Dan, that was brave. And by the way, we've been saying this since David Cameron was in power. Governments have been saying this, that they'll deregulate it and put us in line with nations like Denmark, with nations like Germany, hardly rogue states that we wouldn't want to emulate. But we haven't done it. We need, I think, Dan, on all 5 of these points, right? It goes back to a fundamental point. We need Boris to remember that he has got to where he is through his bravery. He's got to where he is through being able to understand what it is the British people want and desire. And I think a Conservative government should, under Boris Johnson, be as bold as Mrs. Thatcher was, right? It was right then, and I think it's right for the serious times that we face as a country right now.
So, Darren, if Boris were to implement your 5-point plan, do you think he can survive and thrive as Tory leader, even if he does have a strong defeat in Thursday's local elections? And by the way, can I just make a point? You know, it's not a massive surprise for a government that has been in office for a very, very long time to have a bad local election defeat before everyone out there looking at you, BBC, get completely and utterly hysterical about this.
Absolutely not. I mean, I've just mentioned Mrs. Thatcher there in 1983, before the Falklands War, during that mid-term of her first term. This is Boris Johnson's first term. We're midway through it. She wasn't very popular at all, Dan. In fact, her government wasn't very popular. It looked like she was destined to be a one-hit wonder. She, of course, wasn't. She seized the narrative. She managed to roll it back. She became one of the longest serving since the war, prime ministers this country has ever seen. I think Boris Johnson can do the same thing. And I think even if the local elections, as you say, it is not unusual for a government to suffer bad local elections midterm. Look at the way in which President Biden is going through his midterms. Not very well.
That's going to be
I think Boris Johnson, it is going to be so bad. Apparently the Republicans are looking at record numbers.
Yeah.
I think Boris Johnson won't face anything like that. He can seize the narrative back. He needs to sort out, as Nigel was just saying, he needs to sort out the Rwanda asylum plan and stop the boats. And he needs to get serious on energy and implement this 5-point plan, Dan, and he'll be laughing.
So much free advice from Darren Grimes tonight. I hope Boris was watching. You can slip him the invoice later. That's Darren Grimes, host of Real Britain, Saturday and Sunday afternoons here on GBNews. It's 10 p.m. I'm Dan Wootton. Tonight, as Keir Starmer becomes embroiled in his own Partygate scandal, is the Labour leader now flapping under this sort of pressure?
No rules were broken, and that's because no rules were broken.
Not quite.
All the
I
rest
just
of
wondered
it.
if they've been back in touch since the local MP's been raising questions about it.
Well, look, they've already concluded their investigation.
Shifty Starmer. So, should Durham Police reopen the Bears with Care investigation? My superstar panel will weigh in on that next. Tonight, former Daily Star editor, current columnist Dawn Neeson, the Conservative commentator Calvin Robinson and the broadcaster Narinder Kaur. As the US Supreme Court looks set to overturn abortion law, prompting British lefty leaders like Sadiq Khan and scheming Sturgeon to speak out, is Nancy Pelosi really right to describe the ruling as the greatest restriction of rights in the past 50 years? And what a surprise. Rules for thee, but not for me. At last night's Met Gala, as celebs got to strut about alongside muzzled members of staff. Outrageous. That made me very angry. Those stories and more coming up in our media buzz. But also on the way, will Nadine Dorries be able to deliver the media revolution Britain has been crying out for? Former Culture Secretary John Whittingdale, who was David Cameron's media minister, spearheaded plans to sell off Channel 4, analyses whether we'll see the blatantly left-wing broadcaster privatised and the licence fee axe, despite a woke backlash. He's here at 10:20. Might young people be embracing transgenderism simply because it's the latest trend? Well, Lionel Shriver, she's uncancelled on that at 10:40 plus. We'll have a first look at tomorrow's newspaper front pages next and throughout the hour. And check this out. Prime Minister Boris Johnson, I'm told, he's up for both honours in today's Greatest Britain and Union Chatcast. Will he take either? You'll find out before 11. But before all of that, the news headlines at 10 with Polly Middlehurst.
Dan, thank you. The top story tonight. The Prime Minister has told Ukrainian MPs that their country must and will win the war. Boris Johnson is the first world leader to address the Ukrainian parliament since the invasion began, and he announced a £300 million military aid package for the country. President Zelensky said Ukraine and the UK are now brothers and sisters. The Prime Minister added that this was Ukraine's finest hour and that the citizens had broken what he called the irresistible force of Putin's war machine.
Your children and your grandchildren will say that Ukrainians taught the world that the brute force of an aggressor counts for nothing against the moral force of a people determined to be free. They will say that Ukrainians proved by their tenacity and sacrifice that guns and tanks cannot suppress a nation fighting for its independence. And that is why I believe and I know that Ukraine will win.
Meanwhile, multiple airstrikes have hit Ukraine's western city of Lviv, damaging power stations and leaving much of the city without electricity. Meanwhile, in the southwestern city of Odessa, Russian missiles struck a military airfield, destroying drones and ammunition supplied by the US and Europe. And in the besieged city of Mariupol, the Red Cross has evacuated more than 100 civilians from the Azovstal steel plant. The city's mayor there says more than 200 people, though, are still trapped. In news here at home, energy firms have been given a deadline to explain why they're increasing customer direct debit payments amid accusations it's beyond what's necessary. The Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, confirmed energy regulator Ofgem has issued compliance reviews. Suppliers have 3 weeks to respond. He warned firms that if set payments aren't fair and reasonable, action will be swift, including substantial fines. In the United States, the Supreme Court there says it's launched an investigation after confirming the authenticity of a leaked draft seeking to overturn abortion laws in America. Chief Justice John Roberts says he's ordered court-martials to investigate the leak, adding the draft wasn't in its final form. The document suggests the Supreme Court will vote to overturn the Roe v. Wade decision that legalised abortion nationwide in America. President Joe Biden says his office will be ready to protect abortion rights if the ruling is issued. And the World Health Organization warns obesity has reached epidemic proportions in Europe, causing around 1.2 million deaths every year. The new report finds nearly 60% of adults and 8% of children under 5 are all overweight, citing the COVID pandemic as making things worse with a drop in exercise and people eating more fat, salt and sugar. On TV, online and on your radio via DAB+, you're with GB News. Now more from Dan Wootton tonight.
Tomorrow's News Tonight now on our Media Buzz. First front pages are in, and the Daily Telegraph leads on calls from senior MPs who are demanding an inquiry into claims France withheld secrets about missiles that killed 46 British sailors in the Falklands War. Tomorrow is the 40th anniversary of the attack on HMS Sheffield that caused the first British fatalities of the conflict. France has been urged to come clean about a so-called kill switch on the missiles that it did not share with Margaret Thatcher's government. The Metro leads on sensational revelations that fraudulent COVID loans given to a British pub landlord ended up in the hands of terror groups, including ISIS. The taxpayer-funded bounce-back loans handed out by the government were sent to the group in Syria. Unbelievable. My superstar panel back with me now. Current columnist of the Daily Star, Dawn Neeson, Conservative commentator Calvin Robinson and the broadcaster Narinder Kaur. Now, pressure is mounting on Durham Police to reinvestigate Sir Keir Starmer's boozy lockdown breach as yet another minister calls out the rank hypocrisy. So this is International Trade Secretary Anne-Marie Trevelyan, who was the latest in a string of politicians to slam the leader of no opposition, who, let's not forget, was packed swilling beers with colleagues in April 2021 when people were banned from mixing indoors. Now, earlier this year, Durham Police cleared the Labour leader of breaking lockdown laws, but she and other frontbenchers are demanding they reassess the evidence.
Durham Constabulary should look at the situation and look at it properly in the same way the Metropolitan Police have chosen to do that. Well, I don't know, but it appears not so, or indeed whether the reasoning that they brought forward now that there seems to be more photographic evidence is one they want to look at again. I would encourage them to do that.
And Starmer looked more slippery than a snake when interviewed about this whole situation on the Today programme earlier.
Have there been any contact with you or the office in recent weeks?
The police looked at this months ago and it came to a clear conclusion that was no rules were broken, and that's because no rules were broken.
Not quite.
All the
I
rest
just
of
wondered if they've been back in touch since the local MP's been raising questions about it.
Well, look, they've already concluded their investigation. No rules were broken, and this is simply being whipped up as mudslinging by the Tories.
But you must remember if the police had rung up your office.
If the Conservative Party put as much effort into answering the question, how are you going to help people with their energy bills, as they're putting into this mudslinging, they'd actually do a service for millions of people who are really worried about their energy bills.
But by not answering questions like mine, aren't you adding to the clouds of doubt around this?
Well, that's just... We were working, we stopped for food, no party, no rules were broken. I don't know what I can add to that.
And despite that bizarre performance, the Labour Party later confirmed the police have not been in touch. But as Starmer goes conveniently quiet on his last bastion of the PM over Partygate, should Durham Police reopen the Bears with Care investigation? I mean, Calvin Robinson, to me, this is an issue of hypocrisy.
The whole place, the whole Commons stinks of double standards and hypocrisy right now. We've had the Labour Party gunning for the Prime Minister. They wanted Boris Johnson's head on a plate over his Partygate, and now we find out that Keir Starmer might have after.
They sent off 100 emails. They brought a fridge.
It's not one room.
Keir Starmer's had one little party between work, and he was allowed to. And he's been cleared.
What Boris actually has received a fixed penalty notice for at this point is literally being presented with a cake in a Tupperware container that was never opened. No booze was consumed whatsoever. The Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, got a fixed penalty notice. He doesn't drink at all, ever.
Yes, but Keir Starmer has been cleared.
But just remember, Narendra, just remember, Starmer also called on Rishi Sunak to resign.
Yes, but I think that this is... You are desperately clutching at straws here. There's nothing in it. Let's move on. We all need to move on from this. Keir Starmer
but did you not just see the video?
Cleared. He's been cleared.
Doesn't matter that he's been cleared. He broke the rules.
No, he didn't break the rules. I don't think he did. He's been
Have
cleared.
you read the rules?
He was working. Yes, I did read the rules. He was working and he was cleared, Dan. He was cleared.
This is the problem
with the left, isn't it?
It's one rule for them, another rule for everyone else.
How can you justify this? The rules at the time said you could not socialise indoors, even with work colleagues. And he is downing beer, he is scoffing in
He's
the
had
takeaways.
one little beer and he's had a bit of food.
But it doesn't matter. He wants the Chancellor Rishi Sunak to resign from his job because he's in a room where Boris Johnson is presented with a cake.
Desperately
so the report suggests that, first of all, it was after 10 p.m. There's beer, there's curry, 30 people indoors. This does not sound...
who said
this
that?
does not sound like a working environment.
Said that?
But also this is the question of his birthday. And then they double down on the lies. First, Angela Rayner wasn't there. Nobody can remember if she was there or not. Then there's evidence that she was there. The Labour Party...
This is a cover-up, Narendra.
But don't we
This
have
is a Labour Party... Yes, we do have better things to talk about, but Narendra, I have been saying since December we had better things to talk about. It was Labour who spoke about this infinitum for months on end, and all of a sudden Labour doesn't want to talk about it.
But you've been saying we've got better things to talk about.
Yes.
Suddenly you're not talking about better things. Now you're talking about beers and
because it's about hypocrisy and it's about standards in public life. No, I'll tell you what's hypocrisy, Narendra. It's Keir Starmer calling on Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak to quit, and then he's caught and he should stay in the job.
One little beer and a curry and you lot are going all at him. The Tory government, they've had more fines than any other organisation in Britain. They've had about 50 parties. This is one little cake, one little curry,
that we
and
know
one
about.
little beer.
That we know about.
And he's been cleared. You are clutching at straws, and you're being a hypocrite. Talk about better things. Let's talk about what is going on in the world. This is boring.
No, Dawn Newsom, I'm not being a hypocrite. What I'm doing is calling out political double standards because I believe that if you are in public life... Yeah, but Narinder, I've never...
compare this.
Yes, you
this
can.
Is one little curry and a little beer.
I'm sorry, do you not understand what Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner did? When Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak received a fixed penalty notice for literally being presented with a cake in a Tupperware container between meetings, that is what they received the fixed penalty notice for. And Rishi Sunak was not at any of these other so-called parties, Dawn.
Look,
I just want consistency. I want consistency.
You should be consistent in your argument then when you said it's hypocrisy. And you're being a hypocrite now.
No, I'm not.
Well. I think you
I'm
are.
absolutely not. What I'm saying is that someone who is in a senior role in public life, Dawn, if they call on someone to resign for doing something small, if they then do the same thing, they should also go. Because, by the way, I've been very honest about the fact that I didn't believe in the rules. I broke the rules. And I have been very open about that. But this is about holier-than-thou idiots saying that we should lose our Prime Minister and Chancellor for literally receiving a birthday cake when they were downing beer and eating curry and doing far worse.
The rules were nonsensical. I think we all agree on that one.
Yes, they were. But Starmer doesn't agree on that, Dawn. Starmer doesn't agree on that.
He was always calling for longer, harder, faster lockdowns. We've got the two leaders both claiming the same defence. We were at work.
Yes.
It was a work event.
Yes.
Now, I don't believe either of them, to be honest with you.
No,
I think 30 people sharing beers and curry in a room at 10 o'clock, that's not work, OK? You're certainly not canvassing at 10 o'clock at night. No. If you knocked on my door at 10 o'clock at night, you'd get short shrift for a start. And the fact they lied about Angela Rayner, who was there... it's like, you know, she stands out from the crowd. You have to agree with that.
You could forget. That's just the...
Oh, Narinder!
I think
you forget Angela Rayner?
Of course you could.
I wish I could forget Angela Rayner.
Surely after this week, you've realised that Angela Rayner's relationship with the truth is a little bit shaky.
But so's Boris Johnson's and so's Rishi Sunak's. All of their relationships with the truth is a little bit shady. Let's be honest.
Look, all I want to say...
No one is any better here.
Oh, well, quite. I totally agree. None of them are better. And if we actually get the politicians that we deserve, I really hate to think what we all did in a previous life, because it must have been horrible.
Yeah, absolutely. But what I'm saying is that we need consistency in public life.
I totally agree.
I think we need to move on, and it's quite boring.
Oh, it's funny, Narinder, but you weren't saying that. Narinder, it's very funny. It's very funny. No one was saying that when it was talking about Boris Johnson.
We were. Everyone was saying then it was boring and we need to move on, and now suddenly we all want to talk about it.
No, they weren't. Keir Starmer spent PMQs after PMQs after PMQs.
Yes,
I'll produce the evidence for you.
Because that's
talking about Partygate in infinitum.
Yes, because they had so many. It wasn't just one. It was two. It was three. It was four. They brought fridges. My goodness. They sent out emails.
So just to clarify, Narinder, it's OK for Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner to break the rules, but it's not OK for Boris Johnson.
They didn't break the rules. They were cleared. Let's just... And Boris Johnson was found guilty. Keir Starmer was cleared. Let's move on.
Boris Johnson has been issued a fixed penalty notice.
Yes, but Keir
I can see with my own eyes that Keir Starmer was guilty.
No.
Now, earlier today, speaking of Boris, he continued to lead the West, doing important things, Narinder, on the war in Europe after he became the first world leader to address the Ukrainian parliament since Russia's invasion in February, delivering this rousing speech.
This is Ukraine's finest hour. You've proved the old saying. It's not the size of the dog in the fight. It's the size of the fight in the dog.
Now, as Boris channels his inner Churchill, the pressure is clearly getting to Putin's puppets because Russian state media broadcast this hysterical anti-British video where they threaten to launch a nuclear apocalypse.
And what will happen after Boris Johnson's words about a retaliatory strike on Russia? In general, in Britain, they seem to be rambling. Why do they threaten vast Russia with nuclear weapons when they are only a small island? So small that one Sarmat missile is enough to drown it once and for all. The Russian Sarmat is the world's most powerful and is capable of destroying an area the size of Texas or England.
Sorry, comrade. I'm not scared by some dodgy CGI. When it comes to propaganda, no one does it like the Russians. Now, Narendra Calvin Robinson, Dawn Neeson, do stand by, because coming up, as Biden as well as British Liberal leaders lash out, is the US Supreme Court's expected overturning of abortion laws the, quote, greatest restrictions of rights in the past 50 years. Well, that's how Nancy Pelosi described it, and I'll debate that with my superstar panel as the media buzz continues. But next, will Nadine Dorries be able to deliver the media revolution Britain needs? Tory grandee, Brexiteer and former Culture Secretary John Whittingdale, the man who spearheaded the privatisation of Channel 4, he'll give his verdict next.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News. More of tomorrow's newspapers hot off the press shortly, but first, finally, we may be witnessing the birth of a media revolution in this country. Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries has bravely fronted up to biased public service broadcasters by announcing the sale of Channel 4 and putting the BBC on notice, with the very real prospect of the licence fee being axed. Here's what the Culture Secretary told me last month in our exclusive GB News interview.
There are some very good reasons why Channel 4 needs to be sold. It just hasn't helped itself. And I think there are people who've tried to help Channel 4 over the years, but it's just never wanted to.
It's wrong to force people to keep paying for the BBC licence fee just to watch TV, right?
Frankly, a funding model which was established in 1946, where, as you say, people have to pay, and they may not even watch the BBC just because they own a television set. You know, for so many reasons, it's an outdated model.
Now, one of the men who first set his sights on these major changes is the former Culture Secretary John Whittingdale, who served under David Cameron between 2015 and 2016, before becoming Media Minister for 19 months until late last year. So it was there that he helped spearhead the plan to make Channel 4 private, paving the way for Dorries to deliver the killer blow. And John Whittingdale joins me now. So, John, look, I know you always believed in this and you pushed for it behind the scenes, but for a long time there was a lot of resistance within the Tory party to actually press the button on the sale of Channel 4. How have you reacted to what has been, let's be honest, a lot of hysteria to the decision finally being announced?
Well, there's still quite a lot of controversy around it. I always took the view that Channel 4 has a very special role in UK broadcasting, and I want it to continue to prosper. But the way in which media is changing is that in my view, the model was going to come under increasing strain, and I didn't see in the long term how it could be sustained as a state-owned broadcaster that was wholly dependent on advertising revenue at a time when so many competitors were entering the market. So this is about trying to sustain Channel 4, and also I believe that the case for a second state-owned broadcaster has weakened over the years because there are so many new entrants into the market now.
Nadine, in that interview, said they haven't helped themselves with what has been, in my view, blatant left-wing posturing over the years. I mean, Dorothy Byrne, their long-time head of news, even, in my view, very offensively compared Boris Johnson to Vladimir Putin. Do you agree that they didn't help themselves by taking such a left-wing position?
Well, that wasn't the reason why I thought there was a case for a change of ownership. I wouldn't argue that sometimes they've made me very cross. I think they probably have made lots of politicians cross, but the particular examples you chose, especially the McTaggart lecture, which Dorothy Byrne delivered, did seem to me inappropriate for a public service broadcaster, which of course is required under the Broadcasting Code to be impartial and objective. And sometimes Channel 4 did give a strong impression of being rather less than fully impartial and objective. That isn't the reason, as I say, for the change of ownership, but, I think there are legitimate criticisms over some of the political positions they've taken in the past.
What do you make of this whole argument that Thatcher actually would have been supportive of the privatisation if she were alive today?
Well, as you probably know, I spent my first 5 years working for Margaret Thatcher. At the time when Channel 4 was created, and it was created under the Thatcher government, the world was completely different. You had the BBC, you had ITV, and Channel 4 was, as it says on the tin, it was the fourth channel. And that was all there was. And it did fill a gap for many, many years. Now, that gap now is no longer present because there are so many new broadcasters and there's such a huge variety of choice. Margaret Thatcher did not believe in state ownership unless there was a very, very strong case for state ownership. It was the Thatcher government which privatised the gas industry, the telecoms industry, the electricity industry, British Airways, shipbuilders, etc. She believed in the private sector. So I think the chances are she would see the case for privatising Channel 4 as well.
Now, the BBC, the Culture Secretary, the current Culture Secretary, says, actually, this will be the last licence fee settlement. You think that might be moving a bit too fast? Why?
Well, I've always been a critic of the licence fee on the basis that it's a flat rate charge for which there is no relief, no matter what income you have.
Or how little of the BBC you consume.
Or indeed how little. You just
like me, very, very little.
Just having a television set requires you to pay the licence fee. It's not ideal. The problem has been, up until now, that there is no viable alternative. I don't think advertising would work on the BBC. It would destroy those other channels that do depend on advertising. And you could move to a straightforward government subsidy, but there would be problems with that as well. There may come a time when you could adopt an alternative which would involve at least in part subscription, so people could choose whether or not to pay. But you can't do it yet because the technology doesn't allow it.
So you mean there would be a base fee, which would be a lot less than, what, the 159 quid that we pay today, which would maybe provide news, for example. So what, 30 quid or something, and then you could pay various add-ons if you wanted to have access to
That's one possibility. I think there is a case for public money to fund the traditional public service output. That would include news, probably some education, some arts, the kind of programming which would struggle to survive commercially.
But as a Brexiteer, do you accept that a lot of people lost faith in the BBC after the referendum because we saw the biased coverage with our own eyes? This isn't the BBC that we grew up with. And actually, we don't want to fund BBC News anymore because we simply don't believe that it is an impartial service. And, I can give you countless examples. I know you know of the countless examples of their lack of impartiality.
I don't think the BBC is deliberately partisan. I do think that a criticism which has been made many times of the BBC is that they have a particular viewpoint. It's a very sort of metrocentric, liberal, small L, London elite
champagne,
view,
coffee.
And they lost touch with the large part of British opinion, which is why they're not alone, it wasn't just the BBC, but it's why a lot of the people from that background were so, firstly, horrified and secondly, amazed when the British public voted in favour of Brexit. And
they didn't see it coming.
They did not see it coming. And the same thing, to some extent, happened in 2019. I mean, a cataclysmic general election where, constituencies voted Conservative for the first time in history. And that, too, came out of nowhere. And I think that has been recognised, that the BBC, to some extent, have lost touch with some of that audience. And Tim Davie, who I have a lot of time for, is working quite hard to try and restore that.
Yes, he's the new director, or relatively new Director General. Because obviously we've got a local election coming up this week. And I just wanted to ask you about the hypocrisy, or what I see as the hypocrisy, of the BBC and other major broadcasters, it has to be said, their coverage of Partygate, which has been ad nauseum from December, very brief break of a couple of weeks when a war breaks out in Europe, but essentially it has been non-stop from December until now. Every cough and spit of the Tory Partygate scandal has dominated news headlines. They don't seem at all interested in covering Keir Starmer's Partygate scandal, which looks just as egregious to me, with anywhere near the same fervour.
Well, I don't think the BBC are alone. I mean, actually, the media as a whole have been obsessed with this story for a long time, and the consequence has been that there is a great deal of anger, which I understand. People were put through the most terrible deprivations necessarily because of COVID, but there's a lot of anger if they believe that others who set those rules were not abiding by them, and the Prime Minister has apologised,
Yes.
I do feel we are confronting three of the biggest challenges that any government has ever had to face. A global conflict, or what could spill into being a global conflict, post-pandemic, and a massive economic crisis. And those three things, one alone would be enough for any government to deal with, but those are really big issues which are facing every government around the world. And I do think that some of the coverage in recent times has seemed to concentrate on relatively minor issues and has not given the attention to these enormous issues which are going to affect every single person in this country to the extent that they really should have done.
And finally, you're still backing Boris.
I supported Boris. I mean, Boris, has made mistakes. He said so. But I still think that, on issues like Ukraine, his speech today in Kiev...
Which was brilliant.
And which, I've worked with Ukrainians for a long time because I chaired the group in Parliament with the Friendship Group of Ukraine. And I know the support which they see the UK, and Boris in particular, to have given them is stronger than almost any country. Issues which really matter. And again, on COVID, we led the world out of the pandemic with the great assistance of the vaccine. But again, I think we got that right. And, Boris is not without his flaws. He'd be the first to admit it. But I think on the big things, the government has a record of which they can be pretty proud.
Former Culture Secretary John Whittingdale, thank you so much. Now, coming up, is it trendy to be transgender? The award-winning author of We Need to Talk About Kevin, Lionel Shriver, fears that's the case. She's uncancelled at 10:40. Next in the Media Buzz, as British leaders voice their outrage over the US Supreme Court's plan to overturn abortion rights, is Nancy Pelosi right to describe the ruling as the, quote, greatest restriction of rights in the past 50 years? My superstar panel on the way with their take, plus more front pages incoming too.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News. Let's return to tomorrow's news tonight now on our Media Buzz. More front pages in now. The Guardian leads on what we're going to be talking about in just a moment. Joe Biden's comments at the leaked US Supreme Court ruling on abortion imperils civil rights. Elsewhere, there are calls for BP to be slapped with a windfall tax after their quarterly profits reached £5 billion. It's Beergate Day 7 and Keir Starmer just can't answer a straight question, say the Daily Mail. The Labour leader refused 3 times to say whether police have been in touch with him, following fresh revelations by the newspaper that protection officers, wait for this, may have actually witnessed the Bear event. They also say that Starmer snapped back angrily at a journalist who questioned the authenticity of his claim that he actually went back to work after his 10 p.m. curry and beer. We're on the Media Buzz now with tonight's superstar panel. The former editor of the Daily Star, current columnist Dawn Neeson, the Conservative commentator Calvin Robinson and the broadcaster Narinder Kaur. Now, breaking tonight, as I just mentioned, President Joe Biden has spoken out following the monumental news overnight that the US Supreme Court could be set to overturn abortion rights, setting into motion the biggest culture war of the decade.
Look, the idea that it concerns me a great deal that we're going to, after 50 years, decide a woman does not have a right to choose within the limits of the Supreme Court decision. If it becomes a law and if what is written is what remains, it goes far beyond the concern of whether or not there is the right to choose. It goes to other basic rights, the right to marry, the right to determine a whole range of things. If this decision holds, it's really quite a radical decision.
Biden was speaking there after a leaked Supreme Court document, later confirmed to be authentic by the US Chief Justice, indicated the nation's top court is poised to overturn the 1973 Roe v. Wade ruling that legalised abortion nationwide. Such a move would allow individual US states to ban abortion, which up to half are expected to do. 13 states, including Texas, Tennessee and Kentucky, already have so-called trigger laws that will automatically enact a ban if the ruling is overturned. A decision has been tipped for late June or early July, at which point up to 36 million US women could lose abortion access. Speaker of the House of Representatives Nancy Pelosi swiftly decried the proposal, saying the Supreme Court is poised to inflict the greatest restriction of rights in the past 50 years, not just on women, but on all Americans. And left-wing politicians here were equally quick to speak up. I always found this fascinating, actually. So you had First Minister scheming Sturgeon saying the right for women to choose what happens with their own body is a human rights. And meanwhile, London's failed mayor, Sadiq Khan, tweeted, "London stands with women across the United States today." Funny how these right-on politicians tripping over themselves to express their outrage on abortions in the US don't have much to say, do they, about ongoing human rights abuses in, say, Saudi Arabia or China. But there we go. Dawn Neeson, you're angry about this decision.
I am very angry about this. And it's interesting that they can't define 1 minute what a woman is, but then suddenly, you know, women's rights to abortion are to be defended. I am angry with this because I'm of the generation where I actually got to speak to women who endured backstreet abortions before the abortion bill became law in this country in 1967. And if you ever listen to the testimony of a desperate woman that went through a backstreet abortion with a crochet needle in a hot bath of water with a bottle of gin for painkilling, and many of those women died, this will force us back to that situation again, because desperate women will resort to that, Dan. And women died then, and women will die again. And we don't need to do this. We don't need to turn the clock back. And I just feel now that as a woman, everything is going against us. We have fought from the mid-1800s for women's rights, for feminism, and that is now being turned against us. You've got the whole transgender lobby trying to cancel what women are, and we are people with cervixes, we are chest feeders, we are birth givers. No, we are women. And now we have this. We are stopping women having a right to decide what they have to the body. And these are desperate women. No women choose to have an abortion lightly. It's not an easy decision to make. And most women are going to be forced to go back to risking their lives in backstreet abortions. I think it's one of the worst things that I've heard for women in a long time.
Very powerful statement from Dawn. But Calvin, you actually do think abortion has become a lifestyle choice for some?
Unfortunately, it does. It has. And I want to start off by saying that we need to teach men that they need to take more responsibility, because it takes two to tango. But we also need to teach women that abortion is not a contraception. And we have seen in this country record numbers of abortions. In fact, if you look at the government stats, there were over 210,000 abortions in 2010, which is the highest number on record in a long time, which suggests that these aren't just extreme cases, these aren't just extreme circumstances. People are using abortion as a means of convenience. So I think it's a great shame, because it's not a women's rights. It's not a women's rights issue. It's actually someone needs to stand up for the unspoken voice, the innocent baby. Someone needs to argue for the life of that child.
And so do you support the overturning of Roe v. Wade?
Absolutely, because what this does, it's not banning abortion. What this does is it takes it out of the hands of the Supreme Court, and it puts
it sends it back to the states.
Devolves the power back to the states. So people who are elected democratically get to decide on the state's laws, as it should be. So the people decide democratically. It's not imposed upon them.
Why should a man decide what a woman decides to do with her body?
It's not about any man deciding what any woman should do with her body.
Because what it's going to do to your body. Why should a woman be told whether she can have the baby or not? That's terrible. That's such a slippery slope.
It's an interesting question.
You're going to stop by banning... You're going to ban abortions.
As I've just said, it's not about banning abortion, so no, first and foremost. But secondly, what's interesting from the left is a lot of people who have been saying, my body, my choice, about the abortion issue, were saying the exact opposite when it came to wearing masks and taking vaccines. Bodily autonomy meant something different then. But this is not about a woman's bodily autonomy. It's not about a woman's right to do things for her body. It's about protecting the body that is independent of the woman. It's about the body that has been created by both a man and a woman.
So can I just clarify, Calvin, do you believe any abortion is acceptable?
That's a good question as well, because I think often when we talk about abortion, we always go to the extremes about rape or incest. We always go to those extremes, but they are very, very rare circumstances. And as I've discussed, the rates of abortion in this country alone, as well as America, have skyrocketed. So it's not about those extreme circumstances.
Well, it's not just about extreme. Just even mentally, if a woman's just not ready, she just doesn't want the child.
See,
they're not extreme.
That's an argument I won't take. That's an argument I won't take.
Why? You didn't want the vaccination because you didn't know what it was going to do.
If you stop talking,
she doesn't want the baby because she doesn't know what it's going to do to her.
Because
that's a choice.
It's a choice that doesn't just affect her, it affects an unborn child, it affects someone else's life as well. So I don't think it's acceptable to say, actually, I'm going to kill this baby just because I'm not ready to have it or
It's
I
not
don't want
killing
it.
the baby, it's within the time when it's a fetus, you know, it's not.
Actually, yes, it's still killing it.
But
It's
still,
absolutely
that's up to the woman. Surely the slippery
I don't think the
this is like
choice of killing
going,
should be
once you start with this, it's going to go down to another thing and another thing and another thing. It's dangerous, Calvin. This is a dangerous choice.
The dangerous choice is supporting the killing of anyone that is innocent and unborn, has no say.
What about the dangerous choice that women have to make? And you know, many women will be desperate.
That's key.
Will be desperate to have an illegal abortion. What about their lives? Do their lives matter?
No, that's absolutely key. And I think if abortion is the answer, we're asking the wrong question. We need to solve the problems that is driving women to make that choice rather than giving them the choice to kill.
OK. Now, it's been dubbed the Oscars of the East Coast and the Party of the Year, but it might be more appropriate to call last night's Met Gala the most tone-deaf event I've ever seen. Yes, there was a real let them eat masks vibe at the exclusive gilded glamour-themed New York bash as the showbiz and political elite posed in outfits costing more than most of us make in a lifetime, accessorised in the case of the singer Lizzo with a £44,000 flute amid global post-pandemic economic insecurities. And rather than being dazzled by fashion, I couldn't take my eyes off the sight of the hired help rushing around. This made me so angry. So they were rushing around, pulling out dresses and escorting mask-free celebrities into the £28,000 a ticket party while muzzled up themselves. This is the most egregious example, in my view, of revolting COVID theatre. There she is, former presidential candidate Hillary Clinton, who in a virtue signalling move had the names of 60 inspirational women, including civil rights figures like Rosa Parks, stitched into her dress. But there she is, hugging and kissing another mask-free guest, while that poor chap there assigned to her is stuck wearing a face nappy. The style highlight, though, was Kim Kardashian wearing the gown Marilyn Monroe wore to sing Happy Birthday to President JFK in 1962, bought for over £3.8 million in 2016. It wasn't just her fellow fashionistas who were left breathless when she made her appearance, but those poor gentlemen, look, behind her too. Seriously, how can they put up with it? One rule for me, one rule for thee in Hollywood, and it makes me sick. Miranda Kerr, Calvin Robinson, Dawn Neeson, do stand by because coming up the crowning moment of the show as we reveal our choices for tonight's Greatest Britain and Union Jackass. But first, has transgenderism become trendy? Well, the award-winning author Lionel Shriver explores that next in Uncancelled. First, a quick look at tomorrow's show. Coming up on Dan Wootton tonight, is fear of cancel culture ruining telly? One of the country's best-loved broadcasters, Chris Tarrant, thinks his 50-year career would have been cut short if viewers were always this easily offended. He'll sit down with me live. Plus, there's unfiltered opinion from US superstar journalist Megyn Kelly, Spiked Online's Brendan O'Neill and columnist extraordinaire Rod Liddell. And I'll break down the headlines of the day with my superstar panel, the Daily Mail columnist Amanda Patel, the entrepreneur and activist Adam Brooks, and Sunday Mirror political editor Nigel Nelson. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. But it's time now for Uncancelled. And this is where Britain's top commentators speak out on controversial issues without the fear of the cancel culture sweeping the rest of the media. Could some young people be embracing transgenderism simply because it is the latest trend? Well, that's the concern of the author and journalist Lionel Shriver, who in a column for The Spectator has argued that transitioning would hold a special appeal for some members of society due to a perceived increase in, quote, attention and elevated stature. The number of people signing up for sexual reassignment, by the way, has risen 4,400% in the UK between 2010 and 2018 alone. And as Lionel points out, the majority of those referred for gender treatment are adolescent girls, a traditionally suggestible demographic. Well, I'm delighted to say that Lionel joins me now. And Lionel, I really wanted to talk to you about this because obviously it is one of those conversations that most folk are too scared to have. But you say, and I found it fascinating, you say, look, it used to be cool to be gay, right? That used to be edgy, and that was something that a lot of people sort of chose to embrace. But now it's no longer particularly cool to be gay. That's very normal. So you've got some people, like, for example, the Tory MP, Jamie Wallace, now coming out as trans, even though effectively they're living a life as a man.
Well, I was struck by the fact that Boris Johnson admired him as especially courageous, which resonated with a remark that Joe Biden made last November, something about how transgender people were the bravest people that he'd ever known. I actually question how many transgender people he knows. And I guess I just reject that characterization. I have respect for what I believe to be a small core of people who are genuinely suffering from an alienation from the sexual characteristics of their bodies and need some relief. But I don't accept the proposition that we have had such an explosion of people claiming to be transgender just because they've come out of the woodwork, that it's okay now and they've always been there, and then suddenly we've given them permission to show themselves. It's statistically unlikely, and especially this weird switch between the sexes as to who's getting who's transitioning. It used to be overwhelmingly it was men, a few men, but it was men, and now it's girls, especially adolescent girls. It's 3/4 girls. Well, don't tell me that this is supposed to be something that it has to do with the way you were born. Well, how is it possible that there's been this huge swing in which sex is born this way? So let's call it what it is. It's a fad. And, in the media, it's sometimes alluded to as, it could be a social contagion. But that's a fad. That's what a social contagion is. And I question whether going along with a huge social phenomenon with a social fashion is courageous. At this point, it's almost the opposite.
And the risk is, Lionel, that fads spread in schools, don't they? That's where it starts. And so we're seeing arguably quite a lot of pressure or peer pressure or people wanting to be part of this. And you see examples of people who then want to detransition. And it's not always possible because of some of the hormone treatment that you take as a young person. So I am concerned, I think, that a lot of teenagers might do something that they regret because, I know what it was like as a teenager struggling with my sexuality, that the hormones run wild. And you do at times think you're something that you're probably not.
Well, yes, this is not as innocent and passing as a sudden enthusiasm for hula hoops and pet rocks. I mean, it wouldn't matter if it didn't have long-term implications for people's lives.
Yeah.
And especially young people. I mean, look, adults get up to all kinds of things. So if they want to transition, fine. My big concern is with the underaged. And adolescence is ordinarily a time when you're trying things on, as you pointed out, and don't quite know who you are. You're naturally going to be looking for some kind of an answer. So I'm sympathetic with that seeking inclination. But this answer, especially since the medical personnel now are encouraging, ushering you rapidly into this set of procedures, the implications are huge. most of these kids, if they get put on these drugs before they go through puberty, are not even going to be sexually functional. They will not be able to reach orgasm, which, I would miss. And they are likely to be infertile. They won't be able to have children. And they're making this decision at a time where, how can they know whether they want to have children when they're still children? So that, and some of this surgery, if it goes on to surgery, this notion that, you can just have your breasts put back. I'm sorry. That's not the way it works.
No. So what's the solution, Lionel? For us all to take a deep breath and not hand out so many drugs? Or, I mean, how do we deal with this? Because, the figure that you quote in your column, this 4,400% increase, I mean, it's also going to put a lot of pressure on health systems.
Well, once a larger social trend gets started like this, it has a certain amount of momentum. And, I mean, it's funny, I've written about another often maligned social trend, which is school shootings. I mean, that also had an element of the fad. Young people were copying each other. And in this case, in the same way that we can't just say, well, we want to make school shooting uncool. We're not necessarily going to be able to just say, well, we want to make transgenderism uncool. Older people are by definition themselves uncool, and they're the last people that teenagers listen to as to what they should do and what is fashionable. But I think we need a little more responsibility from the grown-ups on the medical side.
Yeah, indeed.
And that's really where the answer is. This whole affirmative approach, and also blackmailing parents with saying, well, if you don't go along with this, then your kid's going to kill themselves, so you'll be sorry. I think that is really wicked.
Yeah, it is. It is. Very good point. Powerful stuff as ever from the best-selling author, journalist and Spectator columnist Lionel Shriver. Thank you so much, Lionel. But it's time now to reveal today's greatest Britain in Union Jackass. My superstar panel are back. Dawn Neeson, your greatest Britain nominee, please.
My greatest Britain nominee is an honorary one, and it is Netflix for cancelling. I know, unusual for cancelling the hideous feminist cartoon by Me Again, Meghan Markle.
Who do you mean? Calvin Robinson, your greatest Britain nominee.
The Prime Minister Boris Johnson for his handling of the Ukraine situation, but also for not knowing who Lorraine Kelly is.
And Narinder Kaur, your greatest Britain nominee.
My greatest Britain nominee is Andy Murray for sticking up for the Russian players who can't play in Wimbledon. Banned.
Yeah, I think he was very good to do that, actually. So I'm going to go with you, Narinder. Actually, Andy Murray.
Well done.
Today's greatest Britain. It's very easy as a sportsperson, to just go with the flow, not challenge the narrative, never upset anyone. And I think Andy Murray has made the right decision in speaking out about this. Union Jackass time now. Dawn Neeson, your nominee, please.
Again, it's an honorary one, and it's the US Supreme Court for potentially banning abortion and turning the clock back on women's rights decades.
Calvin Robinson, your Union Jackass nominee.
That's not what they're doing. Keir Starmer for his doublespeak, his hypocrisy, and the whole Beergate, Durhamgate situation. It's outrageous.
Oh, Narinder's not going to be happy with that. And Narinder Kaur, your nominee.
My Union Jackass nominee is Boris Johnson for not knowing who Lorraine Kelly is. How can you not know who Lorraine Kelly is?
Well, look, given Calvin mentioned it and you mentioned it, I'm going to have to play this. I was obviously offended because Lorraine, friend of mine, and I couldn't believe that he didn't know. But have a look at what went down.
I've got neighbourhood crime down since I was elected
Lorraine is
by
waiting
33%.
to take up all the issues that you have brought up in this interview.
Who's
Thank
Lorraine?
you very much indeed.
He's like looking around.
She's like, Lorraine is waiting. Who's Lorraine?
I mean,
why should he know who Lorraine is?
Come on, Calvin. This is the UK. Everyone knows Lorraine. She's like Madonna.
At least if she said Lorraine Kelly, maybe. But Lorraine, it's like she's not Cher.
He might have thought it was a makeup artist or something. Or I don't
Lorraine
know.
is the Cher of breakfast television in this country. She is known on a first-name basis. And I think It was funny reading some of the comments today saying Boris just lost even more votes in the local elections for offending Lorraine. But you know what? I'm going to go with Calvin Robinson. Today's Union Jackass, certainly Keir Starmer, couldn't even confirm to the Today programme whether he's been spoken by cops over the Beers with Care Partygate scandal. He is slippery as a snake on this, and Narinder, you're wrong on it, but Narinder, you have been a brilliant superstar panellist tonight. Thank you, Narinder Kerr. Thank you, Calvin Robinson. Thank you, Dawn Neeson. But as ever, thank you most of all for you. Absolutely loved your company tonight. I'm back again tomorrow from 9 p.m. Headliners is next. Good night.
Hi there, I'm Aidan McGivern. Warmer, drier and brighter weather is on the way, but for the next 24 hours at least it stays generally cloudy. There'll be outbreaks of rain overnight, followed by heavy showers on Wednesday. This area of high pressure is going to move in for the weekend, but over the next few days weather fronts will topple around the top of it, and they'll bring some outbreaks of rain or showers during much of Wednesday and Friday in particular. And for Tuesday nights, it stays cloudy, spells of rain crossing Northern Ireland, Scotland, northern and central England, as well as North Wales, eventually making their way further south into East Anglia and the southeast. Staying drier for the South Wales and southwest area, but for most, because of the cloud, it's going to be a mild start to Wednesday, 9 to 11 Celsius generally. But it's a grey and damp start to the day, a lot of cloud cover, that cloud covering some hills, some mistiness around coast as well. And I think it'll take some time to brighten up. In fact, many areas will stay cloudy throughout the day. But where we do see signs of brightness, there'll also be heavy showers developing. Initially towards the west, but increasingly the focus later, with highs of 17 or 18 degrees, will be across central and eastern parts of England, as well as eastern Scotland. A warmer day to come for many, but that warmth leading to some lively downpours, hail and thunder possible in places. They do die away on Wednesday night, and during the early hours of Thursday, for many places it's dry with